If you've been enjoying R4E, the Reason for Everything podcast, please be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all platforms or wherever you get your podcasts. According to the leading super recognizer research, your testing scores are the highest recorded out of 7 million people that have ever been tested for super recognizing. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
How and when did you realize that you had a special talent here?
It was completely by accident. So I was minding my own business. About 6 years ago, I was running my own commercial photography business, and I've always been into true crime and crime fiction, and I watch YouTube. Your wonderful American justice system actually televises everything, which has me addicted. We don't see anything over here, but anyway, I was reading a crime fiction novel, and in it they mentioned super recognisers, and they used one from Scotland Yard to help them solve a crime. And I'd never heard of the term before, and I just Googled it to see what it meant. And there was the little Greenwich test. So I took the test, and then things kind of spiraled crazily from there. And I find myself in a whole new world 6 years down the line.
Did you take the test and then have a bunch of folks from University of Greenwich knocking on the door? What was that spiral like?
Yeah, so I took the test and got 14 out of 14, which I didn't really think a lot of, because that test that you can do with Greenwich is brilliant. It takes, as you know, it takes 5 minutes to do. It's really simple, but it's just fun. And it's not conclusive evidence to suggest you are a super recognizer or not. So because I'd got that score, and they encouraged me to do the further testing, and it got to the point where I was doing the testing and scoring so high that then I went into the laboratory at Greenwich University and did some really in-depth testing. And then my scores filtered through to a guy from Scotland Yard who had retired from Scotland Yard, but he was a detective chief inspector there, and he had set up the super recognizer unit whilst he was in Scotland Yard, and he actually set up a private business dealing with super recognizers, and he got in touch with me directly and asked me to come on their first ever training course. So from doing the testing and finding out about super recognizers, all of a sudden I'm in London on a training course finding out what I am, which was a bit of a surprise. But because I immersed myself in the sort of true crime world, it kind of felt familiar as well. So I knew the kind of right questions to ask. And whilst I haven't got any law enforcement background or anything like that, I felt I could kind of hold my own a little bit. So so I still run my own photography business, but this has kind of taken over really. It's and I didn't know I'd got the highest ever scores until about a year after I'd done the testing. And I was working with the professor at Greenwich, and he sort of dropped it into the conversation. He said, "You do know your scores were the highest we've seen," and I haven't got a clue. So that was a big shock as well.
Now, I feel like the term super recognizer is pretty self-explanatory, but could you boil it down to the listeners and really help to capture what that really is?
So we've all got a part of our brain in the front right lobe called the fusiform gyrus, and it recognises faces. So we all have one, and most of them just function normally. We recognise people we know. But on one end of the scale, you've got prosopagnosics, which have face blindness, so they can't recognise their own face in the mirror or their mother. It's Brad Pitt is a famous example of someone with prosopagnosia. It's a horrible condition. So when they were researching prosopagnosia, they thought, well, there must be something on the other end of the scale, and that's how they discovered super recognizers. So it's still being researched. There's loads of scientific research done on this, but super recognizers, our part of the brain triggers differently to others. So essentially, we never forget a face. And there are people who are brilliant at recognizing people who might recognize someone they went to school with 30 years ago. But the difference between doing that and what I do is that, law enforcement could give me a photograph of someone I've never seen before, and I can look at that face for a couple of seconds and then go off into a crowd of 40,000 people and find them. So it's sort of photographic memory for faces only. So I always get asked, are you good with names? Are you good with other things? And I'm really hyper observant. I don't miss anything. I don't, but I do forget names like anybody else. So it's really just about the face. That's what a super recognizer does.
Interesting. And then this is my own naivety here, but what is Scottish Yard, you said? And then why is a super recognizer helpful in that context?
So Scotland Yard is the kind of hub of the Metropolitan Police Force. So the based in London, and Scotland Yard had a super recognizer unit set up there, because what they'd noticed is that the same police officers, time after time, were recognising criminals that they were looking for, but they just might drive past them, see them for a split second. They haven't seen them for 5 years, but they're like, there's the guy we're looking for. So they just noticed they were making identifications over and over of the same officers. So Greenwich University teamed up with Scotland Yard to kind of create this unit so that law enforcement in London could utilise super recognisers in they were brilliant in some rioting we had in London. They were able to identify people from CCTV and surveillance footage. And there's been some quite high profile cases where police officers have super recognisers in the police force have located persons of interest. So it's very, very useful for fighting crime. And that's how I've now become involved in that side of things too. I've worked on murder investigations and all sorts of different missing people, trafficked people. I've found myself in very peculiar situations and doing amazing work that I could only have dreamt of doing. And it's been quite astounding.
You mentioned, work that you could only have dreamt of doing. It sounds like from taking that initial online screener to getting, into the thick of it with Scotland Yard was a pretty quick turnaround. At any point, did you pick your head up or come up for air and think, holy cow, I know I like true crime and fiction crime, but this is way more intense than I ever expected it to be. I want to take a step away. Like, it seems like it was a pretty quick, 0 to 100, for lack of a better term.
You're absolutely right. But no, not once. I'm the sort of person that's 100% or nothing. And I throw myself into anything I do completely. And I just knew that this is exactly what I couldn't have even imagined a better way of working and doing stuff that really made me feel, that it was worthwhile, that I was actually helping and doing something with this skill I've got. I've got this skill. Okay, how can I best use it? I'm not going to just sit here and let it be. I'm going to use it for good. So no, and I've had to see things I can't unsee. I've had to compartmentalize things I've worked on, but I'm quite good at that, I think. And I'm quite I've got a strong character that doesn't allow things to get on top of me too much. I'm very lucky in that respect. So I think I'm made for the job because it doesn't break me down, and I don't stop to think. I just hit it hard, which is quite a helpful characteristic in this job.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then growing up, did you ever have any desire or interest to get into that line of work? And obviously you still have your photography business up and running, but did you ever want to go into law enforcement? Did you ever want to go into, any sort of security work?
Yeah, no, it's very, very strange, but no, I was just an outsider looking in. That's all I was. I didn't ever want to be a police officer. It never even occurred to me to train. And I don't want to be one. I'm really good at being my own boss, and that's the way I like it. And I like to be able to pick and choose what I do. So I'm very lucky in the respect that I'm not pigeonholed into one part of this world. I'm doing all sorts of different stuff. But growing up, I had no real sense of exactly what I wanted to do. I flitted from thing to thing. The only thing I knew for sure is that I wanted to run my own business. My father's my hero, and he ran his own business from a very, very early age and was really successful at it. And he was a great role model for me. So it never occurred to me to have a boss. I only had a boss for as long as I needed to, as I was, making my way early on in the world. And as soon as I could branch out on my own and go for it, I did. But yeah, this is the first time I've had, I mean, my photography was a way of getting my artistic and creative side out there commercially, because I love to paint and draw, but soon realized I was never going to make me any money. And I didn't actually want it to. I wanted to just enjoy it and keep it for something nice for me. So the photography was a great creative outlet. But this was just a total and utter shock, total surprise. I could never have foreseen it, imagined it happening. So yeah, and I think the reason it's working is because I have taken it the way I think is most effective for this skill I've got. So I've started my own business up called Face Detect, and I'm kind of, I suppose, a private investigator, but I'm a surveillance operative. So what I'm finding a lot is I've trained in surveillance and work in that world now. So I find that private investigators hire me in because I'm a surveillance operative. But on top of that, I've got this skill. So if we're watching for our subject, I'm going to be able to trigger the team off and say, yes, that's the one we're looking for immediately. And they're not going to worry about getting the identity of that person wrong. They can trust my judgment on that. And then the whole team use me to verify sightings that they get along the way on the job. So surveillance at the moment is a really big part of what I'm doing. It's really exciting. It's just phenomenal. I'm loving that side of things. And but as I've met quite a lot of other super recognisers along the way, and I have pulled teams together and led teams on certain jobs. We do things like working in big arenas for concerts. So we'll have a super recogniser on all the entrances, and we'll have faces we've been given by law enforcement. And if those faces come through the door, one of us is going to see them, and we'll be able to trigger security for that. So I was connected with a lot of super recognisers over the last 6 years, and I realised that the best part of it, the most exciting part of it, is getting that spot and being able to feel that rush of adrenaline when you see the person you're looking for. So I created a course for a whole weekend where people can, who either they are super recognisers verified, or then they're not, but they think they're brilliant at recognising people, can come and join me, and we go off into the streets, and I will put villains out in the streets, and they've got to go and find them. And once they spot them, their adrenaline levels are out of the roof, and they love it. So it's kind of a surveillance weekend, but very basic. But they get to get their spots and make their identifications, and then learn how to follow those people around the streets without getting spotted themselves. So that's been a lovely part of it. It's teaching other people how to do it.
So cool. And what a crazy 6-year whirlwind from taking that test to where you are now running courses and being a leader in the space. One of the things I have a bunch of thoughts I want to rattle off here. One of which is around the rush of adrenaline. Like I said, I know when I've seen, I just, Shaquille O'Neal, the famous basketball player. I just saw Shaq last week. He's not a hard person to recognize. You don't need to be a super recognizer to recognize Shaquille O'Neal. But I ran into him the other day, and that adrenaline rush that I got was so exciting. And I wear a fitness tracker called the Whoop Band, and it was cool to go back and see my stress monitor go up from the tracks it from when I was getting ready to go up and approach him to take a selfie with him. So I'd be curious at some point, as your all's practice grows, overlaying that with some quantified metrics of people getting excited about actually finding the spot. The other question I'd have in that is, if you guys are going to a big event, I know Wimbledon's one of the events you've worked in the past. Do you all put together a super recognizer Avengers team of like the best super recognizers? Are there like a set number of folks that the law enforcement will call to make sure that they have the right team to come together for that event?
Yeah, well, from that, in answer to that question, it's not normally law enforcement that picks us up. It's more private security. So they've been fantastic in recognising that they've got their wonderful security teams who are all very effective, but then they have they want to add a different level, an extra level for their clients. They can say,
right.
Only have we got this fantastic team looking after you, but we've also put in an extra team of super recognisers, and they have all the intelligence that we've given them of known people of interest. that they're looking for. We've given them their faces, they've absorbed them, and they'll go out and find them in the crowd. So I have got a team of people that I like to work with that are fantastic, and I've worked with them a long time, but I'm always looking for the extra people to add to my team. So that, you know, there's lots of super recognizers out there, but they're not all wanting to do the job in that respect. They might want to sit in an office and do face comparisons or something like that. You can do face comparison reports in this business. You can work for border control, border force, passport comparison photos, that sort of thing. And we have super recognizers doing that. So yeah, well, I've got a lovely team of people I work with, but always look. So when I do my courses, I'm always looking for that little star that might be able to come into the team. Yeah, so that's how it works really. But it's private security more than law enforcement that bring us in. But in saying that, I will be brought in by a private security team, but maybe the local law enforcement police force will be working with them too. So I've done it where the local police force were running a pickpocket team, and they had loads of intelligence of faces that are known to come into that venue and steal wallets and phones and things from the crowd. So they shared all their photos with us, let us come into the police briefing with them. And so, yeah, we work alongside law enforcement, but the majority of the work, I would say, is private security.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
How about with, probably less so in your realm when it's, pictures of faces into real life recognition for the folks that are working at, border patrol or face comparison. How is the rise of AI and everything in that world affecting your all's day to day, at least on the super recognizer front?
Well, AI is an interesting one. I don't know how we can. How do we counter that? It's very difficult. I mean, super recognizers can do wonderful things such as recognize someone with a face mask on, so we can get them just for their eyes or just a small part of their face even. And also if they've had cosmetic surgery, if they've had 20, 30 years go by, and it won't matter if they've got facial hair, different hair, no hair, and it's all changed, we'll still get them. But when you start to change things with AI, it's kind of it's an unfair advantage. How do we? Because it's the only way we can do a proper facial comparison if we're looking at real faces. So,
right,
AI is a problem.
Yeah, it's hard to compare. It's easier to compare apples to apples, but if you overlay some form of in fact, artificialness. Go ahead, please.
I have got a good example of that. So I was asked to do a facial comparison report on a murder inquiry where the girl was never found, but presumed it was a homicide. But there was some question about the photograph that was the last sighting photograph that they had of her the night she went missing. And I was sent it by a private investigator, and they said, can you look at this and tell me if you think it's either her, or hang on a minute, look at her sister. Do you think this could actually be her sister and we've been given the wrong information and it's not even her on this last sighting? So the first thing I noticed is that the last sighting photo that was taken in a nightclub in the dark looked really clear. And I looked online, and it turns out that there'd been a crowdfunding exercise to get this photograph enhanced because the original photo was kind of grainy and rubbish. So they enhanced it with AI, making a completely different face.
Right.
The private investigator had done that enhancement with AI. So now I'm looking at a photograph of a new face that's computer generated that has no bearing on the real one because it's made it all look nice. That's not the idea. You need to look at the proportions of the face and is it the same or not? Well, it had now taken a shadow that was next to her nose and made it look like her nose had more of a hooked shape at the top in the AI version. Her teeth, they look completely wrong. One was really long because it was AI. It had done cheaply for, So I had to go back to the private investigator and say, I can't compare. I went online and I found the original photo in the end myself. And then I did a comparison on the original. And it was her, for sure. And so I had to go back to the private investigator and say, you know, you've enhanced this image with AI, that you can't do that and expect a direct comparison, because that's created a distorted face. So it's dangerous. And that face, that the AI face, is the one, if you Google that case, that's the one you get to see, which I'm really angry about, because it shouldn't even be in the public domain, because she looks pretty weird in the AI and people are making horrible comments about her. This is a girl who needs some respect. She's a victim, and she was a young, I think she was 15, fresh-faced, lovely girl. And in this AI version, you're seeing some distorted image and people are saying, wow, obviously he was on drugs at the end then. It was irresponsible. So AI can be a little bit dangerous in these sort of situations, and it was quite a shock to work in that.
I imagine the down the road fix for addressing that, especially in your world, is some form of augmented reality where you're putting on the goggles or lenses, and it's going to be able to tell you which component of it is or isn't AI. But that's probably many years down the road,
right?
You said that you've seen things that you can't unsee, and it's obviously a pretty heavy line of work to be in. What have you learned from, for yourself from a safety and security perspective? What advice might you have for people listening? Again, you've seen a lot. What would you maybe boil up or bubble up to the kind of key takeaways for key pieces of safety and security for, individuals that are wandering in their day to day?
Yeah. Well, you can get hung up on that. And I mean, I'm so lucky where I live. I live in the middle of nowhere. I'm looking at trees and fields and woods and stuff. And I'm a country gal, so I don't have that built-in sort of sense of, looking over my shoulder and making sure I'm safe. So it's a bit tough. I've had to learn, but I don't know really. It's a great question, but it's hard to answer, because I kind of just jump from thing to thing, take it all in, compartmentalize what I'm dealing with, and then move to the next. And safety, there are experts on safety out there who could tell you far more than I about personal safety. But some people say, is it a good idea for you to be public about what you do? Because if you're searching for criminals out and about in the streets, you don't want them to know who you are. Well, that's the whole idea of surveillance and being good at it, is nobody would know you're on surveillance. Nobody should even notice you. If they do, then you're not doing the job correctly, and there are ways to disguise yourself. So it doesn't worry me at all. So I think just being as professional in my job as I can be, therefore, makes me more safe. So that's how I approach it.
It makes a ton of sense. And then now with face detectives, you're going and training and educating other super recognizers or folks that could be super recognizers. What does your day-to-day look like in that role? What are you looking to do with face detectives? Because it's a rather new company, if I did my work correctly. You started in September?
Yeah, it's brand new, because it's a decision I'd been waiting to make for a long time, and then just went for it. And I wanted to run my own business in this realm, but I don't want any imposter syndrome sneaking into what I do. I wanted to have lots of experience, get ready for it, and that was the right moment for me to start it. And so my course that I run is my favourite thing. It's fantastic. I get the guys on all together, and I teach them basic surveillance, so they learn how to spot someone, once they've got them, how to follow them. That's the key part, is to not be spotted yourself, to blend in, act naturally, all that kind of stuff. And then I take them out onto the streets and show them how to do it myself, and then watch them go for it. And I had a lady fly all the way from Wisconsin to London to come on my course, and
Wow.
Israel, and I've had someone coming from France next time. It's wonderful. But what I got, the biggest buzz I got from it, or I get from it, sorry, is watching their adrenaline. They're absolutely buzzing. They go crazy. They find their person, and they're so hard on themselves if they lose them or they get it wrong, because they just want to succeed and keep that person on with their eyes on, So it's just a fabulous, fun, exciting, fast-paced weekend that they get so much from, but it's inspired some of my students to actually go for surveillance work and to get into that world, because you can decide to just go and train and get that qualification, and it opens up a whole new world of stuff that I had no idea about. I mean, surveillance work is never the same any day. You don't know what hours you're working. I did a surveillance job a couple of weeks ago where it was 15, 16, 17-hour days, but you don't get tired because the adrenaline is there. You know, you're following your subject. You don't know where they're going to go, and you have to go with them. I had to get into a restaurant and sit next to some high-powered businessmen, you know, and get images of them. It's just crazy. And you have to think up stories and backstories and why am I here? What if I get questioned? How do I look natural? So you've got to be multitasking and thinking on your feet the whole time, which suits me down to the ground. I love that kind of thing. So, and I think that my passion for it, my excitement rubs off on the students that I'm teaching, and they leave fired up to go and find something new in their life. Some of them just come along purely because it's the most fun weekend ever and they get to be James Bond running around London. But others actually want to take it further. There's no right or wrong with it. That's the good thing about it. It can just be fun, or it can be something to make your mind turn a corner perhaps and do something different.
I think the irony of what you were just outlining there is, you know, talking about all the multitasking that goes on when you're on a surveillance job. But then your other, you know, passion, hobby, interest, and career is photography and that art and creative. And it's so, there's obviously a lot that goes into, you know, taking the amazing pictures that you do, or, you know, painting or what have you. But it's pretty, you have to be very intentional with what you're doing on the creative side of focusing on really one thing at a time. Because if you're, you know, spread thin or scatterbrained, you're going to kind of go off course. So it's very interesting how there's two very different sides of what you're doing as a career, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And then I think my overarching quality is being hyper organized. You know, everything has to be absolutely spot on organized, everything prepared, you know, plan B, plan C, you know, everything has to be covered. And I think, and I'm always aiming for the least stress. How can I give myself the least stress possible? Right, we'll be prepared, get everything in order. And yeah, the creative side, you're right. There's a lot of detail, a lot of fine tuning, lots of concentration involved. But I suppose there's lots of concentration involved it's about a huge amount in surveillance. So it's two very different realms, but it works.
A lot of parallels.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have to give away the Kelly Face Detect secret sauce for your courses, but what is there a key piece of, or maybe not even key, is there a suggestion or piece of advice you would want to give to someone in their day-to-day that's trying to remember a face better, or you know, they're going to a networking event and they want to make sure that they don't forget the face of their boss's spouse, you know, anything that you recommend for people as they're trying to take something away from this?
There is a good thing that quite a few of us do, but before I say that, I would say that you can't get better at this. You're either born with it or you're not. So you can be good at recognizing someone and be on that scale, but maybe not a super recognizer. But yeah, a super recognizer, you're born with it. You can't get rid of it, and you can't enhance it. You can enhance the skills you've got around it, but you can't become one. You either have it or you don't. But if you're just trying to remember someone and we just give people famous faces, famous people's names that they look like slightly, or give them nicknames. That's, you know, we have nicknames for all the subjects that we're following on a surveillance course and on a surveillance job, and we all know who we mean and they're sometimes not that polite, so I don't want to give you any examples. Who do they look like? Who do they remind you of? It might be a friend, it might be an aunt, it might be someone that just springs into mind when you look at them. So like you said, if you want to remember the boss's wife's face, think, oh yeah, Mrs. Doubtfire, and then that will help you to remember. But yeah, we always kind of do an association thing.
Interesting. Now, you said you're born with the super recognizer trait. when you were growing up, were there, in looking back, thinking back to where you are now, or thinking back to where you were compared to where you are now, were there certain times growing up or, in the early days of your career that you started, thinking you might have a special trait with super recognizing, or was it not until you took that test 6 years ago?
Well, no, I didn't. I thought I was doing exactly what everyone else does, the same as we all think we're seeing the same colour blue in the sky. I just thought we all recognise somebody we haven't seen for 36 years and we only saw them a couple of times and now we're seeing them again. I thought everybody did that. So I really didn't think that I was doing anything special. And an example would be that because apparently this skill doesn't kind of start to manifest until you get into your 20s or your late teens, early 20s and onwards. It's sort of, it builds as you get older. So I can't really say, but my earliest memories of, or the feeling I've got of a characteristic of mine, I always thought was that I paid far too much attention to everybody else and memorizing everybody else, and no one cared anything about me. No one ever remembered me. And I just thought, my God, I'm so forgettable. Why do I take so much effort in remembering everybody? So, for example, I saw a friend who I grew up in a small village and then I moved away from there when I was 9. And in that village, I had a good friend from school and we saw each other quite a bit. And I hadn't seen her for, I think it was something like 36 years. And I saw her coming out of my son's school, high school. And I just bounded up to her, flung my arms around her and said, "Oh, Samantha, I can't believe it." And she had no clue who I was. And she's just, to me, she looked like she did 36 years ago. There's as familiar as if I saw her yesterday, but she hadn't got a clue and looked quite horrified. And I would have to say, "Kelly, Desborough, remember me?" And she'd be like, "Oh my God, yeah," but it happened. That's one example of many, many times I not thought before I acted and just bounded up to people and said excitedly hi and got a blank stare. And it did get to the point where I said, I think I need to stop doing this now. I'm looking like a real weirdo. And then Dave, go on.
I would say you guys weren't friends on Facebook or anything. You just completely recognized her.
No. I hadn't seen her since when I moved away when I was 9. I hadn't seen her since then. And
what about context clues? Like, were you guys back in the same area? Like, I feel like if I was back at
so I moved away and then moved back again many, many, many years later. So it was Buckingham actually that I saw her, and I grew up just down the road from here until I was 9, then moved away and then came back up here. So it was a common place for us to meet. But then there was a good example. I photograph families over the course of a weekend at a private nursery for babies and children up in the north of England that my friend owns. And I do that every year, and I photograph families. They have little photo sessions, and I photographed a family with 2 young daughters, and they're lovely. And I do about 80 families over the course of a few days. Quite a big job there. And then about 6 or 7 years later, I was in Spain having a meal in a restaurant. And you know what I'm going to say. I was just sort of looking across and I saw these 2 girls. And I'm like, oh, they're the 2 girls from the north of England that I photographed about 7 years ago. And I thought, now even that's freaking me out. And this is before I knew I was a super recognizer. That's freaky. That can't be right. So I went and got up and walked past the table and to have a look at the parents. I was like, oh, God, it's there. So I went up to their table and I said, "It's me, your photographer from 7 years ago." And they knew. I mean, they recognised me and they were like, "Whoa, what are the chances?" Because we were in Spain. We weren't in the north of England. And it was 7 years later. And I recognised the little kids first, So it was, but I still thought that's what people do. I didn't ever think I was doing anything special. So, but it all obviously fitted into place after that. When I did find out, I could understand what I'd been doing.
And then remind me again, and apologies if you shared earlier, what prompted you to take that test in the first place?
That was when I was reading the novel, the crime novel
That's right.
put it in. And I since the guy who wrote that novel is a guy called Peter James. He's a very famous novelist over here in Britain, and well, he's an international bestseller, and he's fantastic. And I wrote to him because I thought, wow, I've got this whole new life, whole new career, and it's all down to a few words that he wrote on the page. So, and I heard back from him, and he was absolutely delighted to hear that he had been that pivotal moment in my life that caused this entire new career. So crazy, you know, reason for everything. And I feel like I picked up that book. Little did I know, picking up that book and avidly reading, it's part of a big series that he writes. And it would lead to me being in different countries, working for various crazy people, doing all sorts of mad things. And one of my best achievements was I volunteer for the NCPTF, which is a National Child Protection Task Force over in the US. I work for them remotely, so they'll send me facial comparisons to do. And they sent me one case, some kids had been kidnapped. They had a photograph of the perpetrator and they'd got photos of the kids. And they sent me hundreds and hundreds of results from some results they'd got online, some facial comparisons they got online. And I found the adult straight away on the results of the little thumbnails. And I found the two kids a bit later, within about 10 minutes, and 6 hours later, thanks to law enforcement doing their investigation after that, they got them, they rescued the kids and they arrested the guy. So it's fast. The decision making you can give people with this skill is quick. So in really dire situations where they need speedy decisions, I don't have to sit there for ages wondering if it's them or not. I will just know in a split second. Then law enforcement can take that information, investigate it, and go and use that as a lead.
Unbelievable. I mean, thanks for tying it together with Reason for Everything. I mean, the odds and the serendipity that has to happen for you to read that book and to be, I mean, how often are we reading nowadays and you kind of just skim or you skip past certain things? The fact that you found super recognizers, a couple words in a book, and now we're here having this conversation is pretty remarkable.
It is remarkable. Yeah. Crazy how it all comes together.
Truly. So yeah, thank you for all you're doing to keep people safe. And for those who want to learn more about Face Detect and the courses you're offering, where's the best place for people to find you and get in touch?
Sure. So my website is facedetect.co.uk. Don't forget, I'm not a .com, I'm .co.uk. So facedetect.co.uk has all the information, tells you all about what super recognizers do, a bit about me, and it gives you all the information you need about the courses.
Awesome. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.